what I believe in, and using my voice and any platform that I may have, doesn't matter. I've been a physician, I've been in the government, I've been in private sector, I lead partnership, I've done USAID projects. No matter what platform I have, it's just inherent to me to advocate for the rights of us as an individual and as community. Mm-hmm. And issues, some of the issues that close to my heart are health equity, gender equality, and then race and ethnicity issue, all intertwined into being achieving the basic human rights for all of us. And I think the current position allows me to utilize a lot of my skills. I have been in this field for 30 years. And my first advocacy was at 7-year age. I was with my brother, who was 2 years older than me. We advocated for the police chief. My mom was a political detainee. And we advocated with the police chief that you can't have these hours to visit the mother, which are school hours. We should be able to go to our school and then meet with her. And we successfully got that. We could go to her after our school hours and have dinner with her. So having said that, so our partnership, Action Partnership, is 14 partners in 5 continents. So I get this opportunity to work with really robust advocacy that goes in countries at regional level and global level, between a very good partnership between South and North, right? The equitable partnership that is elusive entity that we work towards. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. My goodness. You know, I think about that, and we're talking about today, for those that just tuned in, advocacy. And it is a global conversation. For those of you that joined and want to talk about politics, we won't be talking about politics. We're not going to be talking about the left or the right. We're talking about our own voice. We're helping folks simply tell their story. So thank you for that, and for advocating at 7 years old. So that we'll turn it back to you, Greer. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta. Next, we will turn it over to Ms. Leah Fleming.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Leah Fleming. I am the Director of Student Equity and Title IX at Coastline College, which is a community college here in Orange County, California. I started, I think similar to Vinita, started my advocacy work early. I started, however, not as early as 7, but when I was a college student. I worked as a resident advisor, a student ambassador, and I was a student athlete. And I was one of those students who, you know, was always into something I probably shouldn't have been. But I knew and understood when it came to advocacy work that as a student, especially as a student of color, a Black woman, and I was at a predominantly white institution, that we didn't understand our rights. We didn't know our rights. We didn't understand the policies of student conduct. And I realized that if students did, if I understood what was happening, if I knew my rights, then I could truly advocate for what I needed as a student. And so that's how my work really began, is, you know, fighting for those issues and situations as a college student. And that transpired into now me being a Director of Student Equity in Title IX, where I feel like I have the voice and I have the opportunity and have the power in these situations to provide students with just that, making sure that they do know and understand their rights when it comes to Title IX, which is investigation of sexual misconduct cases that take place on or off the college campus, or in regards to equity work, ensuring that our resources at the community college level are utilized to truly serve our disproportionately impacted students. And so that's how my work began, and that's what I continue to do. I think it's really important that we know and understand, and within the institution, there's a lot of red tape. So if I can make sure that folks know what that red tape is, and give them the tools to be able to kind of funnel through, that's the fight every day.
Amazing. This is going to be good, Greer. This is going to be good.
I know. Thank you, Ms. Fleming. We will move on to Ms. Lindsay Tirico.
Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm just delighted to be here with all of these great advocates. You know, and I really resonated with what Vinita said about being an advocate is about who you are. It's not about your job title. It's not about where you work. it's really ingrained in who you are, and being somebody who really speaks truth to power when needed. So for me, I spent the last 15 years working in policy and advocacy. I started my career working on Capitol Hill. I worked for my congressman. I'm from Philadelphia. And then I worked for the Senate side. So I like to say I'm a recovering Capitol Hill staffer. It was just an amazing experience, but the pace of life was intense. And I think it was a great grounding in how the political process works. But I left because I felt like we were often removed from what was happening in local communities. And I wanted to make sure that I was grounded in what are the challenges and needs and policy solutions locally. So I went to graduate school, and while I was there, I worked for some local nonprofits. I worked for a mayor's office. And then for about 12 years, I was at United Way doing policy and advocacy work. I recently left that role and have been doing some consulting, and will be starting a new position next month, focused on community engagement in July. And really my passion in nonprofit consulting has been focused on how do we make sure that community is centered in our policy work, and that we're not just advocating on behalf of people and for people in need, but we're actually advocating alongside them and providing them with the tools and resources and empowering them to be able to advocate for themselves and co-create the policy solutions alongside them. So that's work I'm going to continue to do in my next role as well.
Yeah. You know, Lindsay, it's really important, and something that Greer is going to ask one of the questions around, how do we stay in tune to what's going on in our communities? I mean, I think that is so important to stay at that grassroots level, because once we forget that that's where it begins, then it gets complicated at the top because we truly don't know the direction.
That's exactly it. And there are mechanisms that will allow you to, whether it's community councils or having regular visits with people in communities, organizing community conversations and forums and town halls. There are mechanisms to allow that. But I think the most important thing is to be intentional, right? And deliberate about making sure that the community really is at the center. And it's not about your strategic plan or your priorities as an organization, but it's about reflecting what are the needs locally.
Excellent. Excellent.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. And finally, we will turn it to Mr. Dante Latson.
Thank you. Hello, and I want to just quickly thank Michelle, Greer, the entire Diverse Talent team or family, as I refer to them, because being here based in Denver, I get the pleasure of working with them pretty regularly. Again, my name is Dante Latson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Rocky Mountain Communities. We are a nonprofit dealing in the affordable housing space, where our mission is to build brighter futures, inspire hope through both affordable housing and the implementation of resident-centered services. And this year we are celebrating our 30th anniversary. So I'm excited to be here, excited to learn from the other panelists. And once again, I'm just excited to be here, in the fact that it's people who are experiencing, leaders who are experiencing what we're going to be focused on today as advocates, and look forward to the process.
Thank you, Dante. Thank you, everyone. As you can all see, we have an amazing group of panelists today, really coming from all different types of background, but all committed to advocacy and advocating for their community. So with that, we will get started. We have a lot of questions to cover today. I know that everyone is dying to hear everyone's perspective. So I will jump into the first question I have. It's really based on your experience, personal, professional, however you prefer. What does being an advocate mean to you? You know, it's kind of a difficult question. Dante, I want to turn it to you first.
Okay. Well, I think when I think of that, I think first and foremost, having a sense of humility to listen and learn. I think that as we become educated, which, you know, that's good, it's necessary. But I think there's a tendency with that to come along a power gradient. So if we're working with communities that have been disenfranchised, it's important to listen and learn. And I think that Lindsay said it, and she said it so eloquently, that we're not empowering people. I see it as a way of encouraging others to empower themselves, to speak up and to be their own voices. But we sort of have to be the catalyst in some ways. I also think it requires us to have the ability to see the potential in others, especially when they don't see it in themselves.
Right.
And then, ultimately just stepping up and being able to speak truth to power for those marginalized groups.
Dante, I'm going to add to that, because Rocky Mountain Communities, you all do some amazing work. And for those of you that don't know about Rocky Mountain Communities, they provide housing all around the state of Colorado. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. But the population that you serve typically don't have the voice to speak up. Mm-hmm. And you provide, as the CEO of Rocky Mountain Communities and your leadership team, really mechanisms to provide those that have been without homes, but also those have been without just basic services and opportunity. How has that advocacy really trickled through your organization and what you've seen? Because I think it's really important what Rocky Mountains Communities is doing. Again, for those of you that don't know, we're in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I've got some that I'll cover a little later, but just to hit on some of it, we know that I think for many organizations, the murder of George Floyd was a catalyst for many organizations to develop diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. And we were one of those organizations, but we also knew that we wanted to go beyond a statement and that it really needed to be as a part of who we were, the fabric of who we were, to a point that we could feel it through our fingertips and working with the people that we're working with, because essentially we are talking about the working poor. And it is typically poor Blacks, immigrants, poor brown folks, and poor whites. And these are often the forgotten folks within our society. So we are typically working with what we call workforce families, or even families who are in permanent supportive housing. And permanent supportive housing is defined as people who have a history of being chronically homeless, where there's some comorbidity of mental health. And workforce is for folks who have been able to work, but they're typically in low-income jobs. And they're making about 30 to 60% of the area median income. And that area median income here in the state of Colorado, or at least Denver, is about $60,000+. So you can do the math on that. You're talking about folks who have family members to care for, and they're making about $20,000 to $30,000.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will turn it over to Ms. Fleming. What does advocacy mean to you?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So as a learner I am, because I'm in my doctoral program, I looked it up, right? So I looked up the definition of advocacy to really see how that connected to my role and to what I'm doing on a consistent basis. And when we look at it, it says a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. And so I was like, yes, I totally do this every single day, right? And that's what it means, right? I'm always supporting. But for me, it's more than just going to support or recommend. It's providing the tools, giving people a roadblock. I work in a community college system, and while I love education, it was not built for Black and brown students. We know that. And so oftentimes there are so many pieces of, whether it's legislation, whether it's policies, that allow for or don't allow for students to really be successful. There's these pathways. And so I think it's about providing, for me, advocacy, providing the tools. But even more so, I think it's also about this word that we use in my trainings, being a co-conspirator, right? Is that I'm going with you and I am fighting alongside of you as an advocate. I can give you the tools, but unfortunately, sometimes that may not be enough. But me standing by your side, going into that room, going into that space, looking at the policy to say, you know what, this is not just for this one student, this is a systemic issue within our system. And so for me, being an advocate is, yes, I recommend, I support, I provide the tools. And then 3, I'm by your side as we go forward so that you are not alone when there may be pushback along the way.
Yeah, that's good. I'm so glad you looked that up. I have to tell you, that was one thing that I said, the tools are the key. You know, and I don't know, for those of you, again, we're talking about advocacy. And one thing that my mother used to always say is education can never be taken away from you. So get your education. You know, there was no choice, you know, that you have to get that education and get those tools so that we can advocate not just for ourselves, but for others. Yeah, well said.
Absolutely. And I think it also, a lot of the times, especially in the work that we do, and I'm sure that you all do, you hear, you know, who can be an advocate? Can anyone be an advocate? And it really is just about the education and about the tools and about the connection, and exactly what you said, Ms. Fleming, about being right along your side, whoever it may be, to provide those tools and to provide that support. And so I think it's important. And there is a question from the audience that I'm very eager to bring up that really talks about that. So I think it's important. And this is what the panel and the webinar is all about, to provide that insight for those who really don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Gupta.
Thank you. So Greer, your question is the same one, right? Like, what does it mean to be, what you posed to Leah? I think, to me, advocacy means different things at different times. Sometimes, like Dante said, catalytic, right? Sometimes you want to be a catalyst. Sometimes you're called upon to be the voice, right? Sometimes you're just an information provider so that others can act. And sometimes it's about taking the first bullet to show that people can stand up. Right? So it means different things in different situations. And I know that I am very fortunate to have gone through different trajectory in my 30 years, where I have been called upon to be different, respond to different situations and be that different factor. And I want to quickly share one example from my previous life and one example from today's life. So 2 girls, one night in the morning, the 2 girls came to me, young girls, 16 and 18, came to my door, and they were very afraid. And they were, previous evening, they were paraded naked in their village, put on the bonnet of the Jeep and paraded in the whole village. And who paraded them was a criminal elected official who was facing 40 murder charges. Everybody was terrified in the village. When they were paraded in the village, nobody stood up because they were so afraid. And somebody told them, go to this human rights activist. So they came to me. I cannot do it for them. We have to all do the advocacy together. We can support each other, can take leadership, can be behind, but it's not somebody does it for you. Right. So I organized that village for 6 months. 6 months I organized by different strategies, different ways to break that fear and there was a threat to life that I faced during that time. And it just, after 6 months of this deep advocacy, I could see those 2 women taking the leadership role. They led the protest in that village. They led the advocacy at the state headquarters level to call upon the chief minister to take away the elected officials' powers. They achieved it. So it is slow advocacy. It takes time. Sometimes 6 months was very short time for such kind of advocacy, but it did make a difference. And that's when we all feel empowered, right? We all feel, because otherwise we get in, step in like parachute and do it. So that's one example. Second, what's happening today in US with reproductive rights, right? And then that is just speaking out is tough with what we get in. So to me, speaking out at this point is an advocacy for me, right? That I can talk from my experience, having done so many abortion care cases. I practiced for 15 years, and it was just heartbreaking stories after stories, and people visualize just one way, like somebody just messed up and they're going to go get abortion and not even thinking. That's not how it happens. So for me to speak up from my experience is advocacy today. And it's also advocacy for me. I lost my voice when I moved to US. It's a very oppressive structure in some ways. So today advocacy is also me internally advocating for myself to revive my voice. How strong an advocate I was and chasing the paycheck, I become this co-opted individual who can't speak up. So it takes different shapes and different time of your life and different situation. So that's what it means to me. Back to you, Dave.
Yeah, love that. That is so true. Do we chase the paycheck, or are we just going to really stand up and be advocate? I'm not going to go there right now because then we'll just be all day long.
And you know, we will go there. We will go there because someone from our audience has a very similar question. And so that is not a can of worms to open up, but it is a discussion that is deep and it needs to happen. So toward the end, we will go there. We may not get too deep into it.
We'll let Greer control that, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Gupta. Mr. Flores, I will turn it over to you.
Well, I had to reflect on this a little bit myself, and much like Ms. Fleming, I took a moment to consult the dictionary about the actual definition of advocacy. But I mentioned that my role is to be an investigator and to respond to and resolve allegations of misconduct. And in that, inherent in being an effective investigator is being neutral and unbiased and impartial. And I have to really protect that neutrality, that impartiality. That said, I am a member of the organization because I believe in its mission broadly, but in the way I execute my work on a micro level, I have to stay impartial and unbiased. That said, I have to do my best work because ultimately the conclusions that I reach in my investigation speak to the integrity and the credibility of the policies and the organization itself. And so I have to be mindful of those things in the conclusions that I reach in my investigative work. And so in my role, being an advocate is a much more quiet endeavor. And that in itself can be challenging because ultimately the work that I do is contentious. There are perceptions on both sides of the allegations that are brought to me for investigation. And regardless of the conclusions that I make, there's going to be people who are dissatisfied with part or all of my work. And unfortunately, due to the obligations that I have for confidentiality and that the organization has, we are not always in a position to respond to the criticism that we receive. That said, I make it a point to do my best work, put my best foot forward all the time, conduct efficient, thorough, impartial investigations so that the credibility and the integrity of the organization and its policies remain in place to protect the rights of those who are, you talk about the power gradient, and ultimately what a lot of these organizations are in place for is to bolster the power of those who are underserved in our communities. And so a part of that is protecting the credibility of the organization so that the organization can survive to continue advocating and protecting those rights. So that's what it looks like from the chair that I'm sitting in.
That's good.
Absolutely. And it is so interesting to see how it shows up differently professionally and personally for everyone. And it's really just about your responsibility as an advocate and how that looks for you. Ms. Tarico, your thoughts on what being an advocate means to you?
Yeah, I think, the benefit of going at the end here is I can say, I agree with everything everybody else said. So ditto. The only thing I would add is, I think that an advocate is someone who's speaking up for their community or themselves to drive a specific tangible goal. And that it should not be advocating for the sake of advocating or be a conspirator for the sake of being a conspirator. You're trying to drive towards something real and sustainable in the community to improve people's lives, right? And so I think there's a lot of conversation about slacktivism is, you know, simply liking a tweet. Is that an advocate? Is that, you know, is that advocacy? I don't know, right? I mean, because there are cases, of course, where you've seen something trending on social media that actually has led to something really tangible. So I can't say, but ultimately it should drive towards something really specific. It's not just about, simply saying, I like this particular comment, but I'm driving towards something real and tangible that's going to make a real difference. And so I think, being an advocate is really being goal oriented and identifying who are the right targets, who are the decision makers for the issue, and what are the right ways that you're going to influence them to really create change for your community.
Yeah, it's good. I tell you what, this topic of advocacy, and I think that Greer, the topic that you just said, we all represent organizations every day. Their views may be different than your own. And so then how do you really distinguish between the two? And what do you do? So I think that's something I know our audience is asking, but I want to be mindful. This is going to go so quick, you guys. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to turn it back to Greer. She's going to literally popcorn through some of these questions, but really, please, let's share our thoughts.
Emails.
Where we sit with that.
Where are they coming from?
Thank you all.
Weird.
We're going to ask everyone out in the audience to please just make sure that you're muting yourself. Greer, we'll turn it to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for that first question. We do have some audience questions coming through, so I'm going to hop around these questions so we can get to everyone's, which is a good sign, but never enough time. So the next question I have for all of you is really, what do you consider to be your biggest barrier that you're challenged with in this work? And that can be professionally or personally. With
and
that,
again, we'll just get a couple of people.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it to Ms. Tarico.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is advocacy is a long haul. It takes time. Getting legislation passed through any legislative body takes a lot of work and effort and time. And so I think it's just keeping people engaged and motivated and not allowing for fatigue, which happens a lot on a lot of different policy issues, frustration and fatigue and hopelessness, and providing people with hope and continuing to keep them engaged throughout and celebrating those small victories where you can, and just continuing to motivate them that we've got to get this, past the finish line. So I think keeping people engaged and with you in the fight really is, I think, one of the biggest challenges.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ms. Fleming.
I would say personally for me, it's sitting in this spaces of tension. I coordinate a process in regards to Title IX and sexual misconduct. I coordinate, diversity and equity work, and sometimes the mission of the college or where I work may not align with personally, how I feel. And so sitting in that space of tension can sometimes trying to make that decision of do I go in full out now, or do I wait and play the game a little bit, as folks would say, sit back and be strategic about what's moving forward. So I think for me, because sometimes those things do not align, that can sometimes halt my advocacy, or there's a question it can make it may have me not be as vocal, right? So I try to do the advocacy work outside of the organization. So I'm also a California certified advocate for sexual assault survivors. So I can support folks here within my community where sometimes I may not be able to do it directly, and I can fight for that legislation in other spaces. So that tension often I feel like is the hardest personal barrier.
Absolutely. Dante, Mr. Ladson.
Yeah, and I know we're a little short, so I'm just going to add one piece to it. I would say, especially for those of us who have chosen to engage and we are the fire starters, the ability to stay healthy and mentally stable and take care of ourselves, because it's draining, it's pressing. I think Lindsay and others made a good point about keeping team members involved, but even starting with yourself. How do you keep yourself, that your own battery fully charged and leading the way and knowing that people are looking to you? I think it's critical that we have a focus on the self-care.
Yeah.
Can I add something, Greer?
Please.
So very good points made. So just want to add another one to that. Is the biggest barrier I feel is, in addition to what you discussed, and we can talk about so many of them, is the inherent oppressive power structure. Right? So that is a big deal even in global health. What even you take in your small organization or small group, or the inherent this whole colonized structure, that who owns that power in the decision making, right? So that is the biggest barrier, institutional structural barrier, that's a little bit sometimes above us to navigate alone. And that collective power of the advocacy is needed to challenge that barrier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important. And with that, someone just asked, do you have to have the voice? Do you have to always be the one that's vocalizing it? There was this time, and Greer can talk about, where someone said, well, if you were so concerned, why didn't you speak up about a certain issue?
Yeah, that also comes from privilege, to be able to say that. We want to speak up and we can't speak up sometimes. So there are different strategies, different times. So not going into strategy. So I think people shouldn't judge anybody else from when they speak or when they don't speak. You can help them, you can be there, you can talk to them, whatever that is. I don't think that's also hits at the institutional level.
That's right.
We can't put all the responsibility on individuals.
That's right.
Right?
That's
so
right.
That's the biggest thing, that the culture that we live in, it wraps up into our own spinning wheel, like you didn't speak, you didn't do this. No, it's institutional, bigger than us. Right? So I would say that it just, we shouldn't get away from this individual responsibility to collective responsibility, and individual is the oppressive individual is facilitated by the power structures that are inherent.
Lindsay, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I love this discussion. And I just wanted to underscore something that Lee said, which is that, it's knowing when are the times to be vocal too, and when are the times to be quiet. And being, because there are times where you really have to be strategic and smart around when you engage, who you engage, how you engage. There are some times where it needs to be more of a sort of backdoor conversation with an elected official about, here's what we're hearing. Can you engage members in your delegation to support this? And there are times where we need to be vocal and get a groundswell of support around issues. And so, I think being an effective, there's an art and a science to this, right? But I think being an effective advocate is knowing those times. And that's when it's challenging, when you need to be vocal, and times when you need to be smart and strategic about how you, how you best engage on a specific issue.
And then sometimes like Dante said, we have to just take care. We know we need to be vocal. We need to be advocating, but we have to, it's a situational, right? And be kind to ourselves that, okay, I couldn't speak this time or whatever.
Absolutely. And I'm very glad that the conversation turned to this, because actually we have 2 questions that came in from the audience that are really regarding this. So I'd love to hear everyone's. Really, basically, we had a question come in that says, as a person of color, I'm tired of being solely responsible for the education and advocacy. Do you have any advice as how I can continue to be an advocate without it being my only job? And I think that you've spoken greatly to it. The second part of that question that someone had asked was, sometimes when I'm advocating for someone or something, my fellow colleagues and superiors get annoyed, like, here they go again. What can I do about this? And I think that you touched on it a little bit, but does anyone have anything additionally that they'd like to speak to about those two pieces? Oh, Vinita, you were on mute.
And if you would like me to go, I can go on that. I don't want to take all the oxygen from there.
You're good.
Of course, please do so.
It is so difficult. It is so difficult to be a person of color, one, weighed down by that, and then second, fight. And when we say person of color, it's not homogeneous. We have tokenism between us two. And that's even more difficult when we have this tokenism person or individual or entity that advocates on our behalf, but it's actually cutting our foot or the foundation. So I think, again, it's just finding the tribe, because you do need to take care of yourself, where you can vent, where you can talk. I process a lot by talking. So having that is to be able to find those community, right? It's a community to be able to talk and do it, sometimes take the call of speaking out or not. I think that pushing, and the Winston Churchill said about the back. I don't know how many of you have read about the quotation that you keep on hitting when you have an important point. I'm paraphrasing Winston Churchill's quotation, that you keep hitting the point. It's like a back, right? So we have to keep hitting that point whenever we get that opportunity, whenever we get that community, whenever we get in ourselves to be able to do it without damaging our own self. So I think for me, it has worked. I have gone through really oppressive times in the United States, right? When I immigrated 20 years ago, it was a drastic difference. And for me, what worked was finding the community. It didn't matter. Some of my biggest community allies are white folks, right? It doesn't matter. It's finding the community who you can be yourself with and talk about things. And I think that's one thing I've learned is very, very useful, among other things.
Absolutely. Ms. Fleming, did you have anything to add?
No, it was simply, I think, that part about finding your tribe. I feel like there's always folks out there who you may be the one who's always spoken. There's always those people in the back who are like, and pick up on that, pick up on those cues of folks who may be nodding their head to kind of build that coalition. In education, we talk about there's like the choir, the folks who are always going to be on board. They're going to consistently be there. There's those people who are in the middle who are like, I don't necessarily know. Then you have the naysayers. Don't spend your time on the naysayers. You want to find those people who are in the middle who you can try to continue to do that work. I think it's always important, though, when you talk about the situation of being the only one. I feel like I am constantly the person who is called on for every issue on our college campus. And I say, equity is not a Leah problem. This is a college issue. It's not a Black problem, it's not an LGBTQ problem. It is everyone's work. And so I constantly have to advocate to my organization to say, we need to get some other people in here. It cannot always be me. And so that's even sometimes you have to call in outside consultants, because at this point, everyone is tired of hearing of me and that voice does go null. So I think you also within your roles, you have to figure out ways to advocate to your higher ups, to your management to say, I need help. I should not be the voice of this. And then I think lastly, rest. I rest. You know what, you can't call me every day for this. Sometimes you just have to rest and rebuild and regroup so that you can keep going, because this is a long process and it does take time. So like what Lindsay and Dante say, it is important to rest and take that self-care.
And Leah, that brings up, actually segues us into our next question is, on the professional side, the work that you all do, even from different perspectives, is heavy. It's a lot of work. How do you go home and separate that so you can get that rest, so that you can really prioritize your mental wellness and so that you can show up the next day? Joe, I want to turn it to you to start off.
And this is really interesting. This is something that has been a challenge for me because I work in a purely remote virtual environment. So my workspace is my home,
right?
And the lines can get blurry, certainly sometimes. But there's a couple things. I do, to the greatest extent possible, try to be wholly present whatever I'm doing. So if I'm at work, I try to leave my personal phone in an area that I'm not constantly responding to other messages, and vice versa. When I'm with my family, I try and leave my work phone somewhere else. So I guess having multiple communication devices certainly helps. Having strong relationships, relying on family and friends, because we deal with abstract issues sometimes, and we deal with them on a macro level in a lot of instances. And so being able to have those relationships that allow the humanity to shine through a little bit is an important piece. I personally make it a point to stay engaged with hobbies. So I'm a musician, and so I make it a point to find time to practice that craft, because that's something I can do that, well, maybe there's some things that cross over, but for the most part, it's something that's kind of totally different from the work that I do, and it allows me to disengage a little bit to keep my mental health in check.
Can I ask a question with that? And this is for anyone. During this pandemic time when we were all on Zoom, was it a respite time for you in terms of advocacy? And I know everyone's gonna have a different perspective. Or was it, how do I get my point across because now I'm virtual? And so I would love for anyone to ask that, because I think that the virtual piece, and I have a lot of colleagues around the country that said, whew, so glad I'm out of the office, I don't have to deal with. And then others that said, man, I can't seem to get to make this happen because I'm not there physically. So I'd love anyone's thoughts. And again, we're talking about advocacy, helping us tell your story.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was a little of both. I think, on the one hand, I felt actually empowered in a virtual platform because, and I think there's been a lot of studies about how people of color felt sort of more safe in some spaces virtually than they have in person. And so in a lot of ways, I felt like the last few years, I've really found my voice because I wasn't as concerned about my physical being. I was in sort of equal footing with everybody else in this virtual environment. And there were times where I spoke out on a lot of issues that I felt uncomfortable doing in an in-person environment. So I think in that sense, I felt empowered. But, I think like everybody else, just the pace of work over the last couple of years, the sense that you you can be contacted at all times, working at all hours of the day, created a lot of burnout and stress. And that's part of the reason why, like a lot of people, I left my job a couple of months ago to focus on consulting, because it allowed me more flexibility with my schedule. But I think there were certainly some benefits and I think some challenges over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share on that? If not, I'll turn it to Greer.
I would just say, like, personally, that Zoom and being virtual has assisted in some of the works. And I think it's about that strategy piece. So while conversations are happening, on the Zoom session, you're also able to use the chat to start also moving some things forward and being able to have that transcription to say, oh, actually, you did say this, and we can go back to this. And so I was able to use some of those in some of our spaces and meetings to move things forward, because we record meetings, we have the transcriptions. And so sometimes in some spaces you're able to kind of move things as you wouldn't if you're in a group setting and everyone's talking and the focus on one person. You can have these sidetrack initiatives that are happening. And so I think in some spaces it was beneficial to moving the needle.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Greer.
I will add one more thing. In global health, what has happened is the physical boundaries have disappeared. So participation is a little bit more possible because of the mainstreaming of Zoom. So I think that has also added one of the benefits of everybody becoming used to.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Absolutely. Looks like we have time for one more question from the audience. Says, while you see trends with the rights lost among women and the trend of DEI due to the death of George Floyd, do you believe being an advocate is a trend for organizations? And how do you ensure missions from organizations are truly genuine to better the community?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one because the thing is that if you see during COVID, health equity, and we did a little study on it, the whole social media trend has become like everybody's talking about health equity in global north on behalf of global south. Same with after the focus on the DEI. Every organization have a DEI, and I worry about both trends, both similar sort of trends. Is that tokenization? I cannot reinforce enough because every organization is running in DEI, even organizations that are most oppressive, but they get a stamp. Hire a couple of consultants, black and brown, available in tons. We are all available in tons of codes of that thing. That's the again thing. How we paycheck, chasing the paycheck, and how we balance it with our thinking. Sometimes we see those things, but we are not able to speak up. So I think it's a very crucial moment that we don't let this be tokenized.
That's right.
And be a checklist for organizations to say, we are DIA compliant, right? DEI compliant because we provided AO sessions or consultant or something like that. So it's very difficult. Yes, it is becoming more of a trend at an artificial level than real need to go into it.
Yeah. Mr. Dante, I'd love for you to talk about that as well. I mean, is it a trend? How, as the CEO of your organization, that you make sure it's not a trend?
Yeah, I think it can easily become a trend and the flavor of the month if we're not careful. I think as leaders, at least for myself, it's about creating a deeper pipeline, making sure that we are surrounding one another with support, and making sure that along those lines that we're hiring people with lived experience. It doesn't stop there. We have to make sure that they have the tools and resources, the support that they need. But if this is going to continue and take on a life of its own and not be tokenized, as Vanita mentioned, then I think we do have to be intentional about those steps and feeling comfortable in our own skin. What I think about is I became a leader in my 20s and didn't feel very comfortable in my skin because almost every meeting I was the only one that looked like me. And when I look today, that hasn't changed very much. The difference is where I am and how comfortable I am in my skin. So the idea of mentorship, making sure that we create those spaces for one another, that's the only way that this turns into some type of legacy. And it's not diminished by whatever the next iteration is of, civil rights being taken away. But it is important that we be represented by people who are experiencing it or have experienced it. And just to make a real quick reference point, I was just thinking about this as we were talking. The humility is important because despite what we've experienced, if you're not experiencing it now, it's easy to forget, which makes me think of one of my favorite rap groups from the 80s is Eric B. and Rakim. And Rakim had this line where he said, it ain't where you from, it's where you're at. And if you're making decent money and you're somewhat removed from that, it's very easy. You don't know. You're not there. So that's why we have to make sure that we're constantly mixing it up and bringing people who will challenge and who will continue to push the envelope so that we get there and it doesn't become a flavor of the month.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this session has been one of our best, I would definitely say. I wish we had some more time. At this time, I'm going to ask the panelists, our speakers, to put any information, any links in the chat for our audience to use. I'll also be sending that via email. And anything else that anyone else would like to share before we close out?
Greer, I want to add one thing to what Dante said.
Please.
How to distinguish between the tokenism I put in the chat too, is to see where the resources and the decision-making sits in any particular organization. You can have tons of people working on it. If the decision is, again, with certain ethnicity, certain power structure, that's the way to see that how serious an organization is about dealing with DEI issues.
And I would
if
just
I can add one more thing to that, which is, I just recently went through a job search process, and it was important for me to, in each interview, to bring up the question of DEI, particularly if I was meeting with a staff that said, oh yeah, we're all about DEI, but every single person I met with from the organization was not a person of color. And so I think it is also incumbent on us, as you're looking at places to work, or if you're looking for new opportunities, make sure to make that a leading question, because I think organizations are very concerned about recruiting and retaining talent. And so if they know that that's a priority, maybe they'll make some critical changes.
Absolutely. Ms. Fleming, did you have anything else to add?
I was just going to tell folks that continue to take care of yourself. This is not easy work. This is hard work. As we describe it a lot of times, it's hard work. So with it all, continue to use your voice, continue to share your story, continue to share the stories of your community, our communities, but also continue to rest and take that time to focus on you.
Yeah, well said. I really want to say thank you to each and every one of you. And Greer says that every panel, she says, is the best because it just keeps getting better and better and better. But it is so phenomenal. But you know what the best thing is? To know that we have friends and partners in this work with us. And that across the world. Someone asked me the other day, well, who do you know and where are they from? Any state, any country in this world, we have a friend, we have an advocate that's working with us. And you're added to that. And I want to say thank you to our audience. Thank you to Facebook, LinkedIn, Zoom. Zoom was our first sponsor and host that hosted these sessions. They came on and did this for us. But I just want to say thank you. These are our friends. You're not in this alone. We're doing this together. Please stay in contact with us. Greer, Campbell, you are amazing. She does all the behind the scene works, all of our digital social media, and we have a very, very large network that is part of our advocacy work. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Greer to close this out.
Yes, I appreciate all of your time, your efforts, and your commitment to providing this insight for our community, for our nation, and around the globe. I know that I've learned a lot, and so I'm sure that the takeaway has been great. Thank you all again, and thank you to our watchers. We'll be posting this on our website, and I'll be sending some more information to you all. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend and holiday weekend. So enjoy your holiday weekend.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.